All right, good afternoon, welcome back. My name is Christophe Sarvan. I am the Academic Director of iCAAD, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back here for the second slot of the afternoon at iCAAD. I have a confession to make. As a clinician, I think I've been very hasty recycling some of my preconceived ideas about substance disorder misuse and treatment into behavioral addiction. And thanks to Joel Billieux in the last months, I have probably to re-challenge myself about all that. Was I over-diagnosing, quickly using word addiction, where actually it was about preferred behaviors? And I was not sure, and I'm still not sure. So this is a very important question to me, and I hope to you as well. How can we conceptualize behavioral addiction without pathologizing common behaviors? Times are shifting, changing so fast. People are rushing into novelty. Is that addiction? Is that just exploring satisfaction, pleasure with then self-regulation? How do we treat that if needed, or how do we refuse to treat better, actually, to normalize? I don't know. But this is the name of the day. This is the game today. And to talk about that, to challenge what I call the premillennial models. I'm 55 years old. You know, I'm an old guy compared to most of my clients. To challenge the premillennial views on post-millennial or millennial behaviors, we've asked at iCAAD an international speaker and also clinician, an expert, to come and share his faith, experience, truths, and research today. Professor Joel Billieux, world-leading specialist, international speaker about that, young specialist about behavioral addictions, head of the Addictive and Compulsive Behaviors Lab at University of Luxembourg, associate editor of the Journal of Behavioral Addiction, board member of the International Society for the Study of Behavioral Addiction. You can see I have to read because there's a lot there. And published author of about more than 120 publications. I think this speaks for itself. A great expert with us today. So it's a true honor to welcome you, Joel, today. And I'll leave you the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation by the organizer. I'm very pleased to be in London, in this sunny city, for this talk today in this great conference. So, as you know, there has been in the last years an extension of the definitions of addictive behaviors, and in particular, there is an increasing agreement about the fact that non-substance addictive behaviors have to be considered as actual addictions. So there is a different kind of challenges and risk associated to this development, and this is the topic I will address here. How we can conceptualize or diagnose behavioral addictions without pathologizing everyday behaviors or leisure activities. And the topic is particularly timely because, as you probably know, there is a pending decision by the WHO to include both gambling and gaming disorder in the new classification, international classification of disorder, under the label of addictions. So, I'm looking for the button to switch my slide. Okay, this is over. Sorry for that. Okay. Yeah. I was using the wrong arrow. As you can see, I am studied a lot of video gaming disorder and internet-related application, but I tend to be very clumsy with computers. So, there has been a major shift in the conceptualization of addictive disorder, one back to 2013, gambling disorder as a condition was aligned to substance use disorders. Even if it's for longer, of course, that we discuss about gambling as a potential addictive disorder, for the first time in the DSM-5, it has been officially aligned to the other behavioral, to the other substance use disorder and addictive behaviors. And this is based on decades of research having found, for example, similarities at the symptomatic level. For example, loss of control over the behavior that is triggered by cues from the environment, for example. Same kind of comorbidities. Also some shared factors in terms of genetics or environmental factors. Several research documenting similarities in terms of neuropsychological impairment, for example, and also the type of treatment that is effective to treat this disorder. More and more evidence showing that treatment approach inspired of substance abuse is efficient to treat gambling disorder. And more recently, perhaps you are aware of it because it has also produced a lot of press media releases, and I will show you a bit more about that. In the pending version of next ICD from WHO, there is the inclusion as there is an inclusion of gaming disorder, so a pattern of behavior that is characterized by impaired control, by more and more importance of this activity here, gaming, and by functional impairment during a significant amount of time. You have to know that this is not the final version of ICD. This is a pending document, even if it has not been presented like this typically in the news. So before speaking about the conceptualization of behavioral addiction per se, I will just to remind you, or to inform you, but probably most of you are aware of it, that we are here discussing about very common and popular behavior. Nowadays, video gaming, playing video games has become the most popular leisure at the worldwide level. Okay, so it is not anecdotal at all to have something like a gaming disorder in the ICD. So this is pictures of e-sport event where thousands of people are going to see these gamers playing games such as League of Legends or other type of well-known video games. And something that is often believed is that this is limited to, for example, Asian country. This is a kind of Asian phenomenon. And as you can see, and as you will see, there is much more of the major tournament of professional video games that have moved from Asian countries such as South Korea to European countries, and probably we will have more of them in the next year. And this is just an example in France. It's already old now, but 2 years ago, one of the main TV channels in France, in prime time, have displayed a tournament of video game, including professional gamers and people that win a kind of lottery to be able to battle against these well-known gamers. This is typically a polarized topic. And if you look at the press release, the mass media, you will have generally one of these two pictures. On the one side, tragic testimony of gamers whose behavior has ruined their life with major negative consequences, or this case of dramatic people dying because they have played for a too longer time, or they have let children dying, for example. You have often this image linking directly the involvement in these activities with doing drugs, psychoactive substance drug. This is just one example, but you have many of them in the media. And in the other side, you have this approach that different type of, for example, gaming activities can have positive impact on your cognitive functioning, for example. There are some studies having shown that very specific attentional capacities, for example, can be improved by the involvement in very specific games. And typically, this is not video games in general, but it will be very specific type of video games. And then, when it comes to the news, it became playing will boost your cognitive functioning or will boost your brain activity. So, probably, and I will try to show you some evidence and some examples today, we are between these two extremes positions. In reaction to the announcement by United Nations and WHO a few months ago that gaming disorder will be included in the ICD, there's been massive effort, also by some scholars, to discredit the inclusion of gaming as a potential addictive disorder or the actual mental condition. And here, this is an example of what is generally done, and perhaps you've also seen those kind of things. So Chris Ferguson is one of the people really involved in it from the field of media and experimental psychology. Here you have very simple, short and strong message. The aim is to shock people. Here, basically, video game it could be as addictive as any leisure activity. So the implicit message is gaming is not harmful. I will give you other example. Very basic. Clinical psychologists here will make love of it. But the idea is to shock the audience and to create noise and to attract attention. So it's like people who stay in bed all day when they are depressed. When they are depressed. They don't have a bad addiction. Okay. And also some very strong title like this, World Health Organization junk diagnosis for gaming disorder trivializes mental health. One of the last example is to say finally that there is a pressure from Asian states on WHO to acknowledge this disorder because this is important in these countries, but not necessarily at the worldwide level. Okay, so faced to this kind of pressure, I forgot to mention, but typically this is the kind of statement that will be used heavily, that is already used heavily, but that will be in the next week used heavily by gaming industry, for example, to criticize the move that has been done at the WHO level. In reaction to that, there has been some answer also in academic journal, in the press, where rather than to try to go too in-depth in terms of exact etiological factors or categorization of this issue as addiction, as OCD or other type of disorder, we rather here emphasize the public health issue, because what cannot be doubted at this stage is that there is an increasing public health issue related to the excessive involvement in those activities. There is an increasing number of treatment-seeking cases presenting functional impairment. And what I will try to show you after is that when you consider the criteria that are generally used to diagnose substance abuse and you apply them to behaviors, you will not necessarily capture this important aspect of functional impairment, which could result in overstating the actual pictures. So this is a bit the topic, the overview where we are now. So we are in a context where perhaps and probably gaming disorder will be recognized as a mental disorder with gambling under the label of addictions. And I think we have to be aware, and it will be the main focus of my talk, of the associated risks in terms of pathologizing everyday behaviors. And I have decided to work with an hypothesis for this talk, and the hypothesis is the following. So according to the criteria generally used to identify behavioral addictions, it is likely that the elevated involvement in any type of activity can be considered as a psychiatric disorder. And of course, this is a strong statement, but there are some related consequences. I have mentioned the main for me here, but this is open to debate. They could be, given the criteria that are used now, a confusion between real disorders, for example, people having a gambling or a gaming disorder related to suffering and functional impairment, and in the other side, healthy patients, the high and repeated involvement in an activity such as gaming, but not necessarily harmful at all, and or dysfunctional coping strategy. Basically, being involved in online activity or on social network or gaming or other type of activity to face other psychopathology or adverse life event. I would argue that this can lead to inappropriate treatment, and for me we are already faced with such kind of inappropriate treatment, for example in some countries in Asia where there are a standardization of boot camp, assuming that the excessive involvement in these activities are resulting of an addiction. And ultimately, and I will show you some examples here, there is a potential impact upon the credibility of the field as a research field. So in a way, I make the devil's lawyer here, when gambling disorder has been accepted and aligned with other addictive behaviors in the DSM-5, perhaps there has been a kind of the open of a Pandora box where any kind of human behaviors and laser could be potentially conceptualized as addiction. Perhaps some of you will say it's the case for all activity and it's not necessarily problematic, but I will try to show some clear example where it can be problematic. So I have made a short literature review, trying to identify recent reports illustrating what I am meaning here, and I have found some interesting papers, such as this one. An empirical investigation of dance addiction, study addiction. Unfortunately, not enough of my students are afflicted by the condition, so it's clearly related to the studying at university in an uncontrolled way. An exploratory study of self-itis. Self-itis, a bit like a medical term, medicalization of the term. So taking selfies in a way that will result in negative outcomes and potentially conceptualized as a condition or as a kind of addictive behavior. And here we have, I heard some laugh about it, but for me, that can be insidious, actually. I have mentioned here pathologization, but I take again this example of the self-itis. You have to know, perhaps you have read some of them, but this paper about self-itis has resulted in dozens, if not hundreds, of papers at the worldwide level. And what is in this paper, it's just mentioned, finally, some of us are potentially affected by this self-itis condition. So with some colleagues, we have answered to this paper in another journal, calling for avoiding trying to consider each type of potentially excessive activity as a kind of unique condition which deserves his own assessment tool, for example, or the like. And what strikes me, if I take only this example, it's that in the paper, the behavior is described as a condition. And for me, at least, perhaps for you too, when we speak about a condition, it's somewhat like it's like a synonym of a mental disorder. When I have discussed about the authors, they answer me that no, a condition is not a mental disorder, it's not the same. But when it comes to the journalists who use the paper, they will not make those kind of differences. So this is one example. Another example, which is for me even more problematic, as I have described, we are in the process of potentially accepting, including, gaming disorder in the iCAAD. And this is an example of what has been done recently. So it's basically this. If you take the APA, so the American Psychological Association, there is a division for media and computer psychology. This is typically people defending the position that gaming has not to be considered as a mental disorder. And there has been a statement recently, an official statement by APA, saying that finally, if every kind of behaviors can become addictive, why the target is put on video gaming? And the paper which is cited in this statement is, for example, the dense addiction paper that I have mentioned earlier. So it is used here to as one of the, it's not the only argument, but one of the arguments to dismiss the credibility of having the occlusion of a condition such as video gaming disorder in iCAAD. I have described this here as a side effect, of course, because this is not intended by the authors when they have conducted this study about dense addictions here, obviously. But finally, it's one of the use that has been done of the paper. So I have mentioned the reference in case you are interested, but basically what is included here is what I will describe in the next minutes. I will try to come back to some theoretical or methodological issue that have resulted in this conceptualization of a lot of behaviors as addictions. So as I spent too much time in the Catholic University of Leuven in the past, I have decided to speak about sin. And here I will speak about the sin of the confirmatory approach. And you will be able to identify this sin in a lot of my previous research too. So just to start, we can have a look at the criteria that have been proposed in the DSM-5 for internet gaming disorder. Internet gaming disorder was not retained as a condition in DSM-5, but there is a section 3, for a condition that has to be studied and potentially that will be accepted in the next years, and internet gaming disorder was included. And what you can see here is that the criteria that have been proposed to define this condition are just transposed from substance abuse. This is basically the same. There is no criteria that are unique to the playing of video games. So how we get to this? This is mainly based on this approach, which can be described as a confirmatory approach of conceptualizing new disorder. And so the first step of this approach is that generally, for example, we see a patient or who at the symptom level display some key features of addictive behavior, such as loss of control, for example, dancing to regulate moods, or playing to regulate moods, cognitive salience, preoccupation regarding the behavior, and then there is an a priori conceptualization of the behavior the targeted behavior as an addiction. Here, a behavioral addiction. And then the second step, which is generally done, is to develop a screening tools that translate substance use disorder criteria to this new condition. So it's not surprising that in a third step, when you will conduct research on risk factors for addictive behaviors using tools you have developed based on substance use disorder criteria, that you will find the same kind of associations. What are the consequences? The main one, and this is the essence of this confirmatory approach, there is no consideration of alternative etiological models. And typically, when we consider, for example, over-involvement in an activity such as dancing or engaging in social network or gaming, there are relevant alternative models, such as, for example, impulse control disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or simply a kind of excessive and maladaptive coping, which is displayed to face an anxiety disorder or PTSD, for example. There is a focus on the symptoms and not on the underlying processes. And I will also show you a clinical example just after. There is no consideration of the uniquenesses of the condition. What makes this new condition different from substance abuse, for example? And this is typically things you will also work with at the clinical level. And use of standardized intervention inspired from the treatment of addictive behaviors. And perhaps it will work for a subgroup of the patient or the people having problem, if there is actual problems, but perhaps it will not work with everybody. So I will just show you some concrete examples how it has been applied. So I will not here define what is the tolerance in terms of substance use, but if you look what have been the attempt to apply it to excessive behaviors, you will find things like this. For example, for internet use, the need for better computer equipment, more softwares, more hours of use. So this is typically a way to force something to enter into the label which corresponds to your a priori hypothesis. If you see gamers, even gamers with problematic gaming, they need the computer which is okay for the game they are playing. And this not necessarily translate upon an increasing hours of use. Sorry. This is even more strange for me, striking, in terms of mobile phone use. A marked increase in the frequency and duration of mobile phone use to obtain the same level of satisfaction. This has been published in Addiction as a letter. The need to substitute operative devices with the new model that appear on the market. Okay, so this is typically examples where there is a translation of criteria that have been developed for substance use and to apply them with to excessive behaviors. And I can guarantee you that if you look at behavioral addiction research, of course, not in all, but in a significant part of the research done in that field, you will see these kind of things. And then, of course, if you just look at the result, you could have prevalence rate, you can have proportion of people displaying loss of control, but it has been often obtained through this kind of approach. I take the example of tolerance for video gaming. This is how it has been included in the DSM-5 in the section 3. The need to spend increasing amount of time engaged in internet games. So, is this increasing time amount, the need to spend increasing amount of time engaged in internet games, does it necessarily means tolerance? I quote here my colleague Daniel Kertfeld-Winter. when he say finally, there are many legitimate reasons for why an individual wishes to spend more time playing games which have little to do with pathology. As with most things we enjoy, we would like to do it more often. Okay, this seems very obvious, but perhaps, but for me also, probably true. And there are a lot of factors that can explain the increasing of time spent playing that goes beyond tolerance. They could be contextual factors, life event, specific context. We cannot ignore the sociocultural and the technical changes too. There is massive development of esports, so it's not surprising that a lot of young people are willing to do as these professional gamers and are investing a lot of time in this activity. And of course, there are individual and personal motives that can explain why some people are involving a lot of time in this activity. So, after having explained this bias or confirmatory bias, I will try now to propose some bullet points about things that we have to consider as clinician, as researcher, to avoid potentially pathologizing these behaviors or conflating, for example, a problematic use with a high involvement. First, this new emerging condition. For example, self-esteem should perhaps be approached with qualitative methods in highly involved individuals, and something that is often done in our field is to approach this new condition with online survey conducted in convenient sample, in self-selected sample. So it's not surprising that having such kind of approach, you reach prevalence rate of 20% or 25%, and correct me if I am wrong, but if we reach a prevalence rate of 10, 15, 20%, we are not speaking about a mental disorder, we are speaking about a cultural variation, evolution, or common behavior in a society, or something like this. So the phenomenology is important, and we have to be careful about the a priori symptom-based approach. We have not only to focus on the similarities, because most of the time we consider similarities between certain types of behaviors to recognize them as addictions, for example. We have also to consider the dissimilarities, and we have to consider the clinical status of this potential condition too. I will give you an example with also a timely behavior. You have probably heard about binge watching TV series. Some of you are probably looking Games of Thrones, Stranger Things, this series. So there's even, if you look in forums, in internet, a popularization, of the term binge watching. Even it can be have a positive label. And of course, researchers in the field of behavioral addiction were interested in knowing if this is a new behavioral addiction. So what has been done is to apply what I call a symptom-based approach. Here, these researchers have developed a scale to measure problematic series watching, and and if you look at the exact items, they reflect the symptoms that are used to diagnose addictions. So, loss of control, tolerance, and the like. And this is typically the kind of model, if we can call it a model, that is used to create this new potential addiction. I will show you another example. I would say the usual suspect is the Brown component model, which states that to have an addiction, you have to endorse 6 different symptoms: salience, withdrawal, tolerance, mood modification, relapse, and conflict. And this model, or this list of symptoms, has been used many, many times in the field to document new addiction or addictive use of different kind of application. And perhaps you can do the exercise yourself. Just think about your one of your main hobby or leisure activity. For you, I will make the exercise with fishing here. So fishing. You think a lot about fishing. Preoccupation. Perhaps craving, irrelevant thought. You are nervous when you are deprived of having the possibility to fish. There is a progressive increase in fishing. You need to have the newest flies, the more technique sticks to have the same level of satisfactions. Of course, you fish to relax. You have tried to diminish fishing unsuccessful, and you have conflict with your wife or with your man, another weekend spent fishing. I have made it a bit like a joke here, but you have to know that based on such kind of screening item wording, it's very easy to endorse a condition. And I have made here the example with fishing because it's absurd. Perhaps not. Yet it has been used with a lot of different kind of activity. And typically, and I will try to be a bit more convincing with that, such approach will not allow for distinguishing a high but healthy involvement from a dysfunctional involvement. And I present here the work of one of my PhD students in Luxembourg. So this is not, I am not objective at all here, because this is work I have been involved myself. But what we tried here is to approach this new phenomenon of binge watching, avoiding to use or to recycle these substance abuse criteria. So what we have done is to first conduct focus group with people who several times a week show more than more than two TV episodes in a row. And based on the feedback of these people through in-depth interview during 2 hours, we have developed some scale to assess the specific motives behind the activity and also the manifestation of excessive use or involvement, because in certain cases it can also happen, of course. What has been shown in this preliminary study and the next study are arriving soon is that even if there is some similarities, for example, in terms of loss of control, there are also a very unique aspect of binge watching if you look at the motives which are behind. Also in terms of promoting positive affect, so not only to cope with negative affect, also in terms of enrichment, different and new way to enter into social contact, different kind of things. First point, we need to understand in a deep level this new condition in highly involved individual and to avoid to, with quick and dirty survey, inform about prevalence rate on behaviors that we don't know that much or for which we are not certain of the clinical status. Second point, I think that we have more systematically to shift from this symptom-based approach I have described to a process-based approach. And here I have decided to take a clinical example to illustrate this issue. In this paper, we have tried to describe the difference between a symptom-based approach in one side and a process-based approach on the other side. So firstly, what we have done is to apply what I have just explained, what is often done in the behavioral addiction field. So the case depicted in the paper is a young woman which is not at all seeking treatment for her use of the mobile phone. I have to say that I work in a behavioral addiction in Geneva, then we have created a unit in Brussels. I've never I've seen someone arriving with this as a primary demand. Perhaps some of them have seen that, or it will increase, I don't know. But here, this woman was seen by a psychologist working in in private practice. The woman was arriving with anxiety, depression, and romantic problems, and throughout the discussion, throughout the beginning of the therapy, it appears that she has a kind of very intensive use of the mobile phone. And if you apply the criteria that have been proposed to define mobile phone addiction, it looks that she endorsed the criteria. Withdrawal, for example, when she is deprived of the mobile phone, she became very anxious, negative affect, anxiety. She has an uncontrolled use. Sometimes she sends something like 20 or 25 written message in 2 or 3 minutes. She's aware that perhaps her use of the mobile phone is excessive, and sometimes when she is working for her exam, she is a student, it interferes. And she is aware, and there is also conflict with family, and she is also aware that her use of the mobile phone is somewhat excessive. This is a typical example of the loss of control. When she is not able to reach her boyfriend, she very rapidly becomes upset and anxious. In those situations, she cannot stop herself from calling and sending written messages until she eventually succeeds in communicating with him. She reports that, in such situations, she can, without realizing it, make more than 10 calls or written message within a few minutes. Okay. It looks probably obvious for many of you, because I know most of you are clinicians. We should have a more deep and process-based case conceptualization to understand why this young woman is displaying what looks at the symptom level like mobile phone addiction. So I will not go too much into the detail, but what can be identified here is that this woman is characterized for several reasons, including historical factors, by very low self-esteem, which translates upon a belief such as I don't deserve to be loved by my boyfriend, or if I am not physically around, he will no more think to me or will be interested by other women. And she also has developed an insecure attachment, which really translates upon her relationship style. So they have developed, and together, there are two to have developed, you need to be two to develop those kind of interaction style. But when she became upset, she needs to be reassured by him. I am still loving you, and then the negative affect or reduced, relieved, and typically the mobile phone here is the tool which help to relieve this negative affect. So for example, the typical case is when he cannot be reached, perhaps he's in a meeting or in a tunnel or there is no network, and then you have this type of compulsive 20, 30 messages that are sent even before there is an answer. I forget here so what I wanted to say is that here the mobile phone use as a kind of function of reassuring yourself. And of course, our low self-esteem also translate upon negative, repetitive thoughts, rumination, which promote negative affect, and which ultimately probably also increase our use of the mobile phone. She is also someone with not necessarily adapt emotion regulation strategy. She is more in the rumination and dramatization side and less in the reappraisal or putting into perspective side of emotion regulation, for example. Meaning that also when she has this strong emotional context, she tends to lose control. Not only over the phone, but also on the phone. So typically, and even again, if it will probably be obvious for you, target for treatment are more related to her relationship style or the way she perceived herself or the way she regulates her emotions rather than the way she used the phone. Again, this is perhaps an ironic example or an anecdotal example, but using the mobile phone, it's you know that it's really present at every time. So we have to be careful when we try to in a way understand the excessive use of these devices. This is just one example, but if you consider mobile phone, here it's communication, it's reassurance, but as you know, you can use the mobile phone for a lot of different purposes, so it's very complicated. Another example. I will speak here a bit more about video games, which tend to be conceptualized as addiction and as an addiction. Video gaming is very addictive in a lot of situations, also due to their structural characteristic, the way they are created. And what is important, and probably the first question we are, for example, in our is typically when we have the young people arriving at the Internet and Gaming Disorder Clinic in Brussels, of course, we first have to understand why they are gaming. And when you consider this function, you will see that you have a massive heterogeneity in the motives that underlie excessive video gaming or video gaming. Just to give you some examples, this is already old study by Nick Yee, who is a psychologist, having worked in the US. His work has been conducted on so-called MMORPG. This is massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I will show you an example just after that. Why I mentioned that, it's because even if you consider video games, there is different types of video games, and there is different profiles of motivation associated to the different types. So you will not necessarily have the same motives in gamers of World of Warcraft than in gamers of League of Legends or Fortnite, because these games are able to fulfill different needs. But this is a good example here. And actually, Nikki is now working with Ubisoft, which is one of the main gaming societies. So he has understood well the psychology of gamers. So, what is interesting in the way he has conducted his research is that he has used a qualitative approach. So he has recruited, I don't remember the exact number, but more than several hundreds, around 1,000 of gamers, and they conduct qualitative interviews. So this is a huge work that has resulted in a 4 years research grant and big project. And then he has identified some key motives and sub-motives that drive video game involvement. One of these motives is achievement, in-game achievement, and you have different type of achievement. It could be to compete with peers. It could be to develop his character or to progress in the game in a way that is important. Most of the game have international rankings. If you look at the more popular game, they have rankings updated on a daily basis. So this is related to achievement. Typically, a construct with which we often work with the young gamers is the discrepancy between the virtual self and the actual self. And you can see that some gamers have a sense of mastery, of control, of being some worthy, capable when in a specific online application, and lacks of this self-concept when not connect. So this is achievement in game, for example. There is other motives which are very important: social affiliation, reinforcement by peers. There is a shortcut that is often made, which is to say that gamers lacks of relationship, of real relationships. And often when you speak with them, they will tell you that they are in relationship with their friends, the same they see at school, but they continue online within the game. Okay, so I would say it's perhaps qualitatively different, but we cannot ignore that this is kind of relationship. And there is even people who, for example, distinguish socializing from relationship. Socializing is communicating in the game, in the forums, with the other gamers, but relationships is really to share something, for example, which is affective, to have to enter in a real relation, which perhaps at sometimes will result in an encounter in the IRL, in real life, and teamwork, working together to reach an objective. And another dimension important is immersion. Some gamers are playing to be immersed in a virtual world. There is a component of role play to behave as if, for example, you are this character in the game, speaking as if. And some dimensions that have been related to immersion are more related to coping. It could be negative coping or just coping or positive coping, relaxation, for example. It's not necessarily negative at all, but it could also be being involved in order to forget, to stop thinking about real life issue, for example. So when you take a game, and here I take a very old school game, which is World of Warcraft, you have different kinds of achievements you can reach in the game. And here I have just taken a screenshot of the character of one of my friends, and you can see the type of behavior he has in the game. Is it affiliated in a guild? Is it good at fighting with other avatars? Is it more in the other type of achievement? And basically, you can assess the progression. You can compare with other gamers, and this is perhaps not the best example in terms of rankings, because World of Warcraft is relatively outdated, I have to say. There is still a group of players still gaming World of Warcraft. They are gaming for 15 years now, but there are other games more popular with more prestigious rankings. There is this notion of progression. The more you will play, the more you will become powerful. There is also specific reinforcement schedules, typically intermittent reinforcement, meaning that each time you are involved in a mission, you will have a reward, but there is a very, very, very small likelihood that you will have a big, big reward. And in those cases, this is typically some kind of reinforcement schedule which promotes persistence of the behavior. These are what is called structural aspect of the game. This is internal characteristic of the games which participate in making them addictive. The same way that specific gambling characteristic also reinforce their addictive nature. There is a lot of social aspect. I will not have the time here to enter too much into the detail, but if you are interested, I would recommend some of the work by Olivier Servet, because he is one of the first, cyber anthropologists. He has considered Azeroth, which is the world where people are playing World of Warcraft, as a field for his research. So he was not a gamer himself, but he created, of this game, he created an avatar, and then he has been online to meet the people, to reach a guild, to understand and analyze in-game behaviors. And he has, for example, write some essays about sophisticated rituals, including in-game marriage or funeral ceremony or those kind of things. Beyond,
Can I ask a quick question? Is it in English?
there are some of his work is in English, not all, but yeah, I had just an hesitation when I have mentioned, but yet yes, and if you can directly email him or you can email me, and I will share. And this is specific examples, but you also have an important component of teamwork, of guilds. You can be incorporated in guild with rules you have to apply. Typically, if you want to apply to an hardcore guild, because this is the kind of names they could use, it will be much more easy than if you apply to a Babacool guild, for example. And some of these very strong guilds, they will sometimes require that you are present at specific moments during the week or during the day. Typically, something we have also heard by people having difficulty in managing these gaming behaviors is that you are finally constantly faced in a situation where you have either to favor the guild and the game and the online world, or your daily life, work constraints, family obligations, etc. If you have a red or an action plan with your guild at 8, and that you have 2 young children that need to be at bed at 8 for you to start, it will probably not be always easy. Okay, I think I will not go too much into the details of the research we have conducted, because I will run out of time. But if you are interested, I will be happy to share. This is studies where we have monitored avatar in-game during more than 1 year, and we were interested in the behavior that they have conducted in-game. And we have also asked them about their self-reported motives, and it allowed us to have subtype of gamers and to understand the link between motives and gaming performed online. But I prefer to skip, because otherwise I will explain it badly. I will rather show you 3 short clinical cases which could reflect this massive heterogeneity in the motives that are behind the game. So you have to consider the context where these people arrive is outpatient treatment program where people having having problems with gaming, for example, can arrive to have an assessment, and in some cases, psychotherapeutic treatment is proposed. I would say in some cases, because generally, in half of the cases we see, we have only a few meeting with the person or the person and his family, and it's not require a treatment. It's more to understand why the people is gaming and to help to regulate the gaming. And in some cases, then treatment is proposed. So the first cases, you can see here a demand that is not explicit by the gamer, but it's related to the parents. So I would say this is the classical case in the unit we've created in Brussels, for example. Is playing a highly competitive-based game which is called League of Legends. No need to enter too much into the detail, but this is at that time, it's still one of the most popular games, but at that time it was the most popular. And it's related to typically to daily ranking, updating, to a lot of mean to have some achievement. And is playing basically at least 2 hours during the day, more during the weekend. And the consequences are at the academic level, for example, at the individual level, and at the social level. So there is a reducing of the grades, reduction in terms of sleep quality, an increase in weight, and of course some conflict here with the family, as the demand is firstly arriving by the parent. If you look, I will not have the time to enter too much into the detail. It's just to show you how 3 people arriving with a demand in a program like this can differ in terms of underlying processes. If you look at the diagnoses that have been proposed, for example, in the DSM, the criteria are fulfilled. In the classic screening tools that are used, AI high score, there is no clinically relevant comorbidity which is put into evidence here by the psychiatrist. And if you look at the motives, is mainly driven by achievement and competition. This is typically someone, when you assess his self-esteem, who tends to have a boosted self-esteem in game and a reduced self-esteem when in other type of activity. He tends to be also very impulsive and have difficulties in executive control. So this is a case where the treatment has focus here on gaming, actually. I will not enter too much into the detail, but it makes sense to have a kind of consideration of motivation to change and to identify the at-risk situation and to try to go for a controlled use, of course. The objective here is not abstinence, but is a more controlled use of the video games, and it also it's also a discussion with the parents, because typically you have probably heard about those cases where when it's too much we switch off the Wi-Fi, and it results in a big angry and impulsive anger, destroying things in the room, those kind of things. I often use this example. If your son or your daughter is playing soccer as for training during the week, and during the actual game in the weekend, you take him from the field and you remove him, you will probably have something which is comparable. So, of course, it's impressive, but what is important is to understand how you can arrive to this, and I would not necessarily consider this as pathological, because if you are highly involved in an activity and then you are suddenly cut off of this activity, and you know, adolescents have poorer regulation, emotional regulation skill than us, most of the time. So you will have this kind of things happens. So this is the kind of cases where, depending of the severity of the thing, treatment focusing on gaming can be useful. And I will shift the second one, but if you are interested, I am happy to share the slides. Basically, this one is more on social anxious and use online activity to avoid real life interaction. And but I will shift directly to the last one because is a striking example for me. So here we have someone arriving in a very poor situation. With important depressive symptoms, playing a lot every day, especially the evening. She is playing games with an important immersive component, and she is much more involved in the game for a time period that is defined. This has a lot of negative consequences on the self, on her work, and on the other. And we realized relatively quickly here that, so she endorsed also the DSM-5 criteria, but actually this girl is suffering from a PTSD that has resulted from a sexual assault. And why she is playing that much is a coping strategy she has found, which is helpful to neutralize the flashback. Basically, flashback intrusive thought. Basically, when she is immersed in this online environment, she is no more experiencing the flashback intrusive thoughts that are related to the aggression. So, of course, when she arrived, she's playing 10 hours a day. She's totally in, but actually, this is here nothing that is related directly to a kind of addictive behavior related to the games. And this is not a case that was considered for treatment in the facility. So here you can see people arriving with a demand related with video game excessive involvement, and for which, if you consider the reasons behind, you have, of course, different type of treatment. And it's one of the reasons why I am very concerned by the development of standardized approach to treat this disorder. For example, I have been confronted in South Korea with, for example, a clinic where, based on screening tools, where it's very easy to endorse the criteria if you are highly involved, gamers. So based on those kind of screening tools in schools, or following demand by parents, the clinic proposed standardized approach such as transcranial direct magnetic stimulation of the frontal lobes to improve self-regulation, or prescription of similar substance that you use for ADHD, but in a kind of standardized way. So when I would like to calls for caution regarding ineffective treatment, I am also thinking to this. And this is among the challenges when we consider new conditions such as gaming disorder. I am among those who believe that the condition has to be considered because of a public health issue, yet we have to be very cautious when it comes to this, to not conflate high involvement and addiction, and also when it comes to treatment. I think I will take 5 more minutes and I will save the last 15 minutes for discussion. So, my third point, but I need to drink a bit. Is the necessity, and this is even more important now that perhaps the condition will be included, the necessity to be able to not conflate what can be called patience from dysfunctional involvement or addiction. I repeated, an intensive involvement in an appetitive behavior is not necessarily a pathology. I will take again the dance addiction example here. I like this paper in a way because it's very useful to illustrate the bias. Here, the first author is himself a tango dancer, and he was at a tango manifestation where you see one of the people here dancing really a lot. He is always the last one on the milonga. He dances during the whole night, and so he made a kind of hypothesis that perhaps he is addict. So what he has done is to take the substance use disorder criteria and to ask them to this guy, and unsurprisingly, he endorsed the criteria. So he was concerned about potential addiction in these people. So he developed screening tools based on substance use disorder, and he applied it to the tango convention. 45% of the guys were addicted based on these criteria. So the question is addiction or patient. And about 1/3 are describing a strong craving for dancing. So is it pathological and obsessive craving, or is it a manifestation of healthy desire? I'll let you make your own idea. We can have the same kind of consideration for gaming, and this is some work conducted by Joel Billieux, who has just completed a PhD with me in Louvain. And what he has done here is to take the classic IGD criteria from the DSM-5, among other, and to look at the relationship between these criteria and items measuring healthy involvement, not problematic, versus problematic involvement. And what is interesting here is you can see that the criteria both correlate relatively strongly with the 2 scale, while one is problematic and one is not problematic. And for example, only the addiction subscale is correlated with depressive symptoms. So basically, it could imply that these criteria that have been proposed in DSM-5 are not necessarily able to distinguish between high involvement but healthy involvement from pathological one, which is a big thing because these criteria have already been used in prevalence study in community samples. I will show you that. If you look at the DSM-5 definition of the condition, it is mentioned in the definition that gaming has to be related to functional impairment. Unfortunately, in a lot of study using the criteria, this preliminary but important statement is not taken into account. And even in epidemiological studies that have been conducted in representative national samples. And for me, it is one of the reasons which could explain the very high prevalence rate obtained in those studies. If you take the DSM criteria, basically, and if you not consider this preliminary prerequisite of functional impairment, you have 9 criteria, and you have to endorse 5 of them to to be labeled as having a disorder. There is a total independence of the symptoms. So here, it's just theoretical, but you have two cases. Both have 5 or more, so they can be considered as having internet gaming disorder, and they share some symptoms. But here, this case has favor gaming over other type of activity, whereas the second case self-reports negative consequences. So perhaps this one is a healthy involved gamer, and the second one is a problematic gamer. The problem is that in the epidemiological study I have mentioned just before, there will be no difference between these two. Both will count as problematic gamers. This is the last numbers I will show. But we have conducted another study in a sample of gamers. Because the studies I have mentioned just before are conducted on the general population. So here we are interested in the criteria when you apply them to gamers. So this is not problematic gamers, this is not gamers arriving at our treatment center, this is just gamers who agree. So there is a bias of self-selection for sure, but who agrees to take part in a laboratory study. And even if the objective of our study was not to consider these symptoms, we were interested in considering the two groups in terms of decision-making. But we found no differences. And one of our hypotheses is that decision-making, impulsivity, loss of inhibitory controls. Because if we expect these criteria to distinguish pathological gamers and if gaming is an addiction, then we should expect the same kind of group difference in a case control study. We totally failed to identify these differences, so we also checked at the symptoms. And we realized that some of these symptoms listed in the DSM are endorsed that by, for example, if you look at preoccupation, 77% of the sample. So, and if you look at the proportion of people having 5 or more criteria, it is 30%. So 30% of the gamers from the community we have recruited endorsed the tentative DSM-5 criteria, which is an additional argument. And to finish, I will present some recent work that has been conducted by a group of scholars who were concerned by the potential over-pathologization of using these recycled substance use disorder criteria. And this has taken the form. So the idea, what is important here is that, because this is an overall definition of behavioral addiction, our aims is not at all to provide the new definition or something like this. All of these people were sharing the concern that there are some bias in the criteria that are used to diagnose this behavioral addiction. And the idea behind this paper was to generate a debate. So we started with a kind of definition of what could be a behavioral addiction. And we have created an open science framework platform. So the link here, OSF, is a platform to inform about what is for you behavioral addiction. So I would be very happy, for example, if some of you will contribute to this by providing their own input. I will show you what as a result, because we have produced this operational definition. We were very surprised and happy when Addiction was interested in publishing it. And then, based on the feedback and the debates and the replies we had, some people disagreed, some people agreed, we have already generated an updated definition, behavioral addiction 2.0, and now we are already considering a potential new modification. So it's not at all a definitive definition or the new definition or something like this. It's just a way to promote discussion about the conceptualization of these emerging conditions or problematic behaviors. So the current definition is a repeated behaviors leading to a significant harm and distress. The behavior is not reduced by the person and persists over a significant period of time. The harm or distress is of a functionally impairing nature. And some exclusion criteria have been proposed. The behavior is better explained by an underlying disorder, for example, a depressive disorder. The functional impairment results from an activity that, although potentially harmful, is the consequences of a willful choice. And you can imagine that typically this criteria is highly debated. I'm sure you will have a reaction to that, and probably you are right. The behavior can be characterized as a prolonged, intense involvement that detracts time and focus from other aspects of life, but does not lead to functional impairment or distress. It's to consider the high but healthy involvement. And the last criteria, it has been modified. Actually, the first criteria was only related to escapism, to coping or mood regulation escapism. And some of the people who have reacted to our paper were very convincing in the way that it's not necessarily a good exclusion criteria. And it has been modified temporarily by the behavior is the result of a temporary coping strategy as an expected response to common stressor or losses. So my concluding words, and I realize that I have taken a bit more time than what I have planned, but yet I will finish with this concluding word. There is an urgent need to shift from a confirmatory and symptom-based approach to a theoretically grounded and process-based approach. I have just here mentioned an example of a paper proposing a model considering underlying psychological and biological dimension in the field of video gaming. There is a need to improve diagnostic approach of behavioral addiction with tools having a clinical relevance, construct validity, able to assess changes. And here there is an initiative at WHO to try to have a large-scale project with different countries to develop these screening tools, a bit like what has been done with the audit, because we are in a field where, and I have shown you some example, there are an accumulation of different screening tools, and it never stops, and it's complicated too. We have to acknowledge the differences between high involvement and dysfunctional involvement, and we have to develop, perhaps it's something that has not been done a lot in our field, open science research practices, and I have shown you just one example, but it also comprises pre-registered reports, pre-registered hypotheses, because of typically the confirmatory bias that I have explained in the talk. I would like to finish by thanking the colleagues with who I have discussed a lot in the last years, and whose discussion has influenced the work I have presented. Sorry. When I become tired, my English, is French arrive. And I am lucky with my team, so I would like to thank them. And merci pour votre attention.
Once about 5 ago, we had the two Venn diagrams and the crossover. You said the one with a healthy gamer.
Yeah.
Yes, that slide. Go that one. How do you come to that conclusion where the one's a healthy gamer and the other is a problematic gamer?
It's an hypothesis, but
because they both have 5 criteria. Neglect of alternative recreational activities is a criterion that's accepted.
Yeah, but yeah.
Wrong.
I would have answered that. The fact is that here, for case B, there is self-reported negative consequences. For case A, I would say that this is arbitrary to consider that the time this gamer involved in this activity instead of another one is necessarily a sign of a pathological condition. It's okay? Because when I have discussed about tolerance, for example, I have said that there is a lot of different factors that can explain why someone is playing more, including social aspect, including personal aspect, and it's hypothesis, but I am not sure at all that, for example, when people endorse this item, they consider it necessarily as a problematic thing.
Well, then there are a lot of reasons why people might be drinking more as well.
I'm sorry, I've not understood.
I say there are a lot of other reasons why people might be drinking more.
Yes, sure.
Which we accept as tolerance.
I agree that the same kind of comparison can be made. Yet, if you look at recent research in the field of video gaming, there is a tendency to equate this increase in time to a biologically determined tolerance. And still, we are discussing about something that has no direct psychoactive effect on your brain.
I'm very interested in, your exclusion, your last exclusion on your last slide, because, at what point do you draw the line between escapism and addiction? Any addiction is a form, is often driven by desire to escape. And so how do you, how do you say, okay, well, this woman, Emma, was not addicted even though she was playing 8 hours a day, and she didn't qualify as an addict because she had PTSD and it was a form of escapism. Where do you draw that line? Because, I think all of us will agree that, addiction is fueled by escapism, and that in itself is a pathology.
Yeah, you're totally right, and the criteria is in blue actually because it has been modified following arguments like yours, which is of course totally true and totally convincing. It's why we have decided not to remove the exclusion criteria, but to make it clear that is a kind of coping that can be expected in a certain situation and that not last, or such as the repeated use of a substance or a behavior to relieve distress, or in the case of the PTSD girl I have presented just before.
But how long then does it have to last before it becomes an addiction?
I have no answer to that. It's not necessarily, I would answer that it's not necessarily a question of time, but it's more a question of, it's more qualitative. Huh? The same, it's also why I am concerned by the policies about the number of time you have to use gaming or screen watching time, huh? Because even if some people tend to make us believe that it's empirically based, some people can play not that much and have massive consequences, and other can have 4 hours daily gaming without problem. So I would say for escapism, we have to consider which kind of escapism. And for me, escapism, you have a kind of continuum from relaxation to escapism to, in the worst cases, dissociation from real life. And you have probably to consider the same kind of continuum to apply this criteria. But it's imperfect and it's inexact and devoted to debate.
Thank you for bringing some common sense to the proceedings. I appreciate your take. I don't know that avoidance is pathological, but I think our approach to addiction, which is very reductionist, has become pathological, certainly in American society. And I feel that's sort of happening here as well. After all, most of the contributions to the DSM-5 were American and not European. So here I am. I'm actually going to hand over the microphone to Dr. Burdick, who's personally responsible for most of the dysfunction.
Thank you, Dr. Sidoli. I appreciate this. I'm not sure with that Italian accent that I got most of that, but my question is, why isn't there the language that's similar to that of personality disorders that suggests this is a disorder that's better explained, say, by this type of compulsive behavior? Does everything have to be specific to the tango or to gambling or what have you? Does it have to be that?
Now, the idea here was to, and in a way, I have also insisted on the uniquenesses of the. I have also insisted in the uniquenesses of the condition in my talk, so it makes totally sense. Here, we decided to have a kind of reflection about behavioral addiction itself, with all the challenges and the limitation it has. So, of course, there is no aspect specific to gambling or gaming, but I would say that even if you consider gambling and gaming, they are themselves umbrella construct. You will not compare a Texas Hold'em gambler to a slot machine gamblers. So here, the idea was to reflect on the construct of behavioral addiction. And I'm certain this will continue to evolve, but our objectives were to generate a debate, because we were considering that part of the literature is flawed from some methodological bias, so we wanted to attract the attention on that. And our aim was not at all to promote a new definition. And actually, I can even confess that it was during the review process of the paper that we were asked to think about specific criteria. And so we tried.
No, I was particularly taken when you were talking about the Wi-Fi, turning off the Wi-Fi. I've had clients where I've gone over to the home. I'm just going. Before I liked it. But, you know, I've had clients and parents that have invited me over to the home and say, my son, the minute we turn off the Wi-Fi, oh dear, is this where I sing? No, so the minute you turn off the Wi-Fi, then, you know, he goes over to the friend's house, the neighbor's house, and then they get in trouble because all of a sudden they're the ones that are providing the Wi-Fi. And so, I mean, these are questions that I think are haunting and probably perpetuating a lot of new discovery as far as, you know, where we are as a digital age. I appreciate it very much. I think it's time to get serious about technology and some of the behaviors around it.
Yeah, thank you very much for emphasizing it. And what is needed is information, developing information. And at one point, there is an acknowledgement that this is a public health issue. It will allow to develop this information, because what we realize with an important part of the gamers who arrived is that there is a total misunderstanding by the parents by what they are doing actually. And in those cases, most of the time, it not require a psychological treatment at all, but it requires that the parents know what kind of games, for what function, and then it will be more easy for them to put some rules and to avoid, when it's too much, to cut off the Wi-Fi.
Joel, Marc-Antoine.
The gamer.
The game. My son has a question for you. Okay. I told him today I would come here, and he said, can you ask Joel this question? So he said to me, Dad, I know what controlled alcohol use is. You embody it. You only drink until you stop quickly because you feel more relaxed. One drink. I said, it's true. So ask Joel, what is controlled technological use? Qu'est-ce que c'est l'utilisation de la technologie?
Je vais répondre en français alors. Thank you very much for this bilingual question. No, this is a very important question, but I think it's probably different from one person to another one. But I would say as long as you have no significant consequences for example, if your family, friends are okay with the way you are involved in. If yourself you're not experienced shame, negative affect, or feeling of this is too much, and that you are doing good at school and or at your work, for me there is no problem at all, and it's an illusion to go for abstinence strategy, for me at least, when we are dealing with ICT, because of course if I ask you are you dependent of your mobile phone, you will answer yes. You use it for the work, you use it for checking your emails, so okay, it's work, so and you use it for a lot of reasons, so it's complicated because these devices are totally integrated into our life, and it's why, for example, typically it not means that experiencing, for example, digital detox will not bring you very good experiences and useful skills, not at all, but at the end you will probably go for a controlled use, which is what I have defined before.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Who mostly does the kind of gaming that you are exposed to, people who come to your clinic, in terms of gender balance, in terms of age?
It's majority. For a long time it was a high majority of men,
Yeah.
so basically more than 90%.
Yeah.
But things are changing. Things are changing for several reasons, including the fact that there are much more games who are popular among women. So but the ratio is about 1 girl for 10 boys, or approximately. But really, even if you look at the numbers, there are much more women gaming too.
Yeah, in fact, Don Grant yesterday said that the highest number of gamers was female, which I thought was extraordinary.
Yeah, he was talking about things like Candy Crush and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So
females from 35 on upwards were
yeah,
kind of-
the games that are called casual games, those you play.
Not the hardcore stuff that you
Yeah. But the
that have anthropological
Candy Crush is
studies
often
and such.
considered.
Oh,
No. Candy Crush is often considered as a kind of casual game because the type you have, for example, first-person shooter, MOBA games, MMORPG, and there is this label of casual games which is deceiving. Okay, I agree. It's not means that you don't play to them a lot. It means that basically people who have categorized game were a bit considering these games such as that this is not real games. It's why they have been called like this. So it's bad label. But for this kind of games, you are right. It's even more women than men, and it's a bit. It seems that it's a bit like with slot machines. Those games are more played for escapism and dissociation purposes, and games who are more favored by men, such as FPS or MOBA, those type of games are more often played for achievement or social related motives. So you can have some similarities there. But it's very popular among women too. And for the other type of game, which had for a long time been almost exclusively played by men, the pictures is changing too.
I'd just like to say, sorry, I'm a teacher, my background is education. I'd like to say thank you very much indeed, because throughout my teaching career, the DSM, it appeared kind of halfway through the DSM and all these labels and the medicalisation of children, giving them labels, giving them, some kind of, taking them right out of this identity. I am a human being. Any human being is a walking miracle as far as I'm concerned. And taking them out of that, giving them labels, then they identify with the label, and then they feel that they're sick people, and their view of life is so reduced by that. Years ago, the odd child had asthma, Now, in any class of children, there's so many who've got labels, conditions, medical conditions, and where often maybe difficult behaviour was regarded as a legitimate response to something happening in that child's life that needed to be understood and addressed and nurtured and helped. It's, to the psychologist, gets the label. And it's been quite frightening. Now we're at DSM-5. Because when I started teaching, labelling was bad. You don't label children. They're growing creatures, they're human beings. You don't label them. That's going to so limit their lives and the view they have of themselves. But the DSM seems to have taken over. And now, as I say, so easy people pathologise. So this is like a breath of fresh air. I hope this is the beginning of a very big, open, good, healthy conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear you. I really appreciate the time and trouble you put into this talk. I'm aware that there's no agreement amongst professionals, there's no agreed consensus definition for addiction. Every definition can be subverted. What's your opinion of that, please? In a sense, it's a vanity to attempt a definition. When the precedent for this, addiction, chemical addiction, suffers from no satisfactory definition.
Thank you for that comment, and it's why I tried to make it plain that our aim with that was not to provide the updated or new definition that has to be used, but rather to generate a debate about the way we conceptualize these excessive behaviors.
But how do you? I understand that. Thank you. But how do you understand the absence of a consensus definition for addiction? How does it make you feel? What's your opinion of that?
I don't think I have a ready answer for that, but I think when it comes to consensus, there are and mental health, the same kind of problems should. It would be very complicated to have some kind of consensus on the definition of mental disorder because of available evidence, because of different models used by people. I think this is also the case for other type of mental disorder, and I cannot say why there is some definitions which are more popular, other less, some more evidence-based, some less, but yeah, I have no answer for that, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
If someone wants to answer instead of me. Great.
I was just thinking about that, Neil, and I think it's true of many conditions. For instance, multiple sclerosis. It's not one identifiable illness. It's a set of tests, that you respond positively to, but it could be, 20, 30, 40 different illnesses all under this umbrella of multiple sclerosis. Cancers, very similarly, are all unique, but all, grouped together as, breast cancer. And then there's many different types of breast cancer. And you can't really have an ultimate definition of any illness because they're all so kind of, some evolve and some are just, there are lots of variations, I guess.
Okay, that's the final word.